Death is the one appointment every human shares, yet the one we avoid thinking about the most. But preparation for death is not a morbid exercise. It is an act of wisdom, clarity, and spiritual grounding. When we confront the reality of our mortality, life becomes more precious, our priorities become sharper, and our faith becomes stronger. Preparing for death is not merely about facing an ending. It's about understanding what truly matters while we're still alive. It invites us to reflect on the condition of our souls, the legacy we leave behind, the peace we carry within, and the hope that sustains us beyond the final breath. And when these pieces come together, the fear of death begins to lose its power, replaced instead by purpose, confidence, and a deep sense of readiness. When we talk about preparing for death, the first thing we must do, before anything else, is to acknowledge its reality. That may sound obvious, almost too simple, but most people live their entire lives in quiet denial of the one certainty that no human being escapes. We build routines, we chase goals, we get lost in daily business, and somewhere in the back of our minds we maintain the subtle illusion that death is something distant, something hypothetical, something that happens to other people in some far-off season we don't have to think about yet. But the truth is, the moment you were born, you began moving toward an appointment that has already been scheduled. And the wise person is not the one who fears this appointment, but the one who prepares for it. Acknowledging death does not mean living in dread or in gloom. It means living awake. It means recognizing that our time is not infinite, so we must treat it as sacred. Psychologists have long noted that when people confront their mortality, their priorities shift dramatically. Suddenly, the things they once obsessed over don't matter as much. The irritations that once stole their peace lose their power. The ambitions that once felt urgent give way to decisions that are actually meaningful. When you face the reality of death, you begin to choose your life differently. You become intentional instead of automatic. You start paying attention instead of sleepwalking through your days. And that awareness is liberating. It frees you from the trap of postponing the things that matter most. How often do people say, "I'll forgive when the time is right, I'll slow down when life gets easier, I'll take my spiritual life seriously when I'm older, I'll repair relationships when things settle." But things rarely settle, and the perfect time never appears. When you accept the certainty of death, you also accept that someday is not a guarantee, and instead of depressing you, that realization sharpens you. It provokes you to act now, while you have breath, while you have strength, while you still have the chance to shape the story of your life. There is a strange paradox built into the human condition. The more we avoid thinking about death, the more fear it holds over us. But the more we confront it, the less control it has. Fear grows in the dark, it thrives in avoidance. And the moment you turn toward the reality of death with honest eyes, that fear begins to shrink. It becomes something you can understand, something you can prepare for, something you can approach with clarity instead of panic. You take back the authority that fear once held. There is also a philosophical depth in recognizing death that has shaped thinkers, leaders, and spiritual teachers for thousands of years. They understood that death is not meant to haunt life. It is meant to guide it. When you understand your finiteness, you become more protective of your purpose. You quit wasting days as if they were cheap. You stop treating relationships as if they can be tossed aside. You stop numbing yourself with distractions because you finally understand that time is not something you can recycle. Every minute is withdrawn from an account that will one day hit zero. And that truth does not make life smaller, it makes life bigger. It pulls you into gratitude, into awareness, into the realization that every moment is a gift you cannot afford to take for granted. And once that reality settles into your spirit, something profound begins to happen. You stop living for applause, and you start living for authenticity. You stop chasing what looks successful, and you start pursuing what feels significant. You stop comparing your timeline to everyone else's, because you understand your story ends differently, your purpose unfolds differently, your journey has its own rhythm. Death reminds us that we don't have time to be anyone other than who we were created to be. When you face the truth of death, you also reclaim the truth of life. You start asking different questions. What legacy am I building? What relationships have I neglected? What habits are draining me? What am I allowing to distract me from what really matters? What would I regret if today were my final day? These are the questions that prepare the heart, that shape the soul, that push you toward living with peace and purpose instead of fear and avoidance. Preparation begins with awareness, not morbid awareness, not anxious awareness, but grounded, courageous awareness, the kind that frees the heart rather than burdens it. And once you dare to embrace that reality, you step onto the path toward a deeper life, a clearer mind, and a more peaceful spirit, because the moment you finally accept the certainty of death is the moment you truly begin to live. Once you've acknowledged the reality of death, the next place your attention naturally shifts is inward, toward the deeper, quieter landscape of your own heart. Because preparing for death isn't just about getting your affairs in order or tying up loose ends in your schedule. It's about examining the spiritual condition of the inner life you've built over the years. It's about asking yourself what you trust in, what you stand on, and what you're ultimately anchored to when everything external is stripped away. When the noise fades, when the titles don't matter, when accomplishments can't shield you and relationships can't substitute for clarity, what is left? That is the question every honest person must face, and it's at the very core of true preparation. There is a moment in every life when the external world becomes powerless to give comfort. Money can't soothe the soul. Success doesn't offer certainty. Even the people who love us most can't answer the questions that echo inside the human heart. And that is why preparing for death begins with spiritual honesty. It's not about adopting religious language or repeating the traditions you were raised in. It's about asking whether your faith, whatever it may be, is something you have inherited or something you've truly examined. Because inherited faith is fragile. It crumbles under pressure. But examined faith, tested faith, personal faith, this is what steadies a person when the horizon of life grows thin. Every worldview, every belief system ultimately has to answer two questions: what do I live for? And what happens when I die? If your beliefs can't speak to both, then they can't sustain you. This is where so many people get caught. They live with a vague sense of spirituality, a half-formed idea of meaning, a loosely held belief about the afterlife, and yet they never take the time to look those ideas straight in the face. They know just enough to feel mildly comforted and not enough to feel deeply anchored. But when death draws near, whether in a literal sense or just in the deeper awareness that life is short, vagueness is not enough, ambiguity is not enough, a general belief in something is not enough. The heart longs for clarity, and clarity begins with truth. People often avoid spiritual reflection because they fear confrontation with their own inconsistencies or doubts. But confronting those doubts is the doorway to peace, not the obstacle to it. The most secure spiritual life is not the one that avoids difficult questions. It's the one that wrestles with them honestly and emerges with conviction. Faith is strengthened through examination, not threatened by it. The condition of the heart also involves the moral and emotional burdens we carry. Guilt, unresolved mistakes, hidden shame, these weigh heavily on the soul. And when people think about death, these hidden weights often rise to the surface. But that's not something to fear, that's an invitation. Recognizing the weight is the first step to releasing it. The human spirit was never meant to die with regret as its final companion. Whether through confession, forgiveness, reconciliation, or simply telling the truth to yourself after years of silence, healing the heart becomes a crucial part of preparing for the end of life. There is also a psychological dimension to this. People who have made peace with themselves and with God tend to face life with far less anxiety. They live lighter, they live clearer. They're not running from their past or pretending their inner struggles don't exist. Their spirituality isn't a performance, it's a foundation. And foundations matter, especially when the storms of mortality begin to appear on the horizon. Preparing spiritually doesn't mean you have all the answers. It doesn't mean you never struggle or never question. It means you've located a source of meaning that is bigger than your fear and stronger than your uncertainties. When the heart has a place to stand, the mind has a place to rest. And that inner rest becomes a form of courage. It shapes the way you live your daily life. It shapes the way you face hardship. And eventually, it shapes the way you face death itself. Ultimately, preparing for death requires looking inward with honesty, humility, and courage. It means letting your beliefs move from the surface of your life into the center of it. It means creating a spiritual clarity so strong that when the final chapter comes, you don't enter it with fear, you enter it with peace. Because the soul that is aligned with truth does not tremble at the end of life. It steps forward with peace, knowing it is finally going home. As you continue preparing inwardly, There comes a point where you must turn your attention to the relationships that have shaped your life. The ones that lifted you, the ones that challenged you, and even the ones that left scars you'd rather forget. Because no matter how strong your faith is or how clear your understanding of mortality becomes, unresolved relationships can keep your soul tethered to old pain. And one of the most overlooked parts of preparing for death is making peace with the people who have walked through your story. Not perfectly, not always lovingly, but undeniably. Human beings don't simply live, they entangle. Every year of life ties you to people with invisible threads, words spoken, wounds exchanged, kindness given, resentment stored, forgiveness offered or withheld. And whether we realize it or not, these threads gather weight. They can enrich us or burden us, strengthen us or weaken us. When people face the end of life, psychologists consistently observe one universal pattern. They don't talk about money, status, or unaccomplished ambitions. They talk about relationships. They remember the people they love, the people they hurt, the people who hurt them, and the people they wish they had spoken to one more time. And that becomes a mirror for the rest of us. If relationships matter in the final moments, they matter now. What often keeps a person from healing those relationships is pride. Pride says they should apologize first. Pride says, it wasn't my fault. Pride says, they don't deserve forgiveness. But pride also happens to be one of the heaviest weights a human heart can carry. It hardens us. It isolates us. It convinces us that holding on to pain is a form of strength, when in reality it's a silent chain that restricts our emotional and spiritual freedom. Forgiveness is not a sentimental gesture. It is a deliberate act of release. It does not rewrite the past, but it does free the future. It does not excuse what was done, but it does remove the hold it has on your spirit. And that matters deeply when preparing for death, because you cannot carry bitterness into eternity. It is too heavy. The heart must be light enough to cross the threshold without dragging decades of unresolved anger behind it. But forgiveness is only one side, courage is the other. It takes courage to ask for forgiveness. It takes courage to admit that you played a part in breaking something. It takes courage to reach out to a sibling you haven't spoken to in years, or to a friend whose relationship faded under the weight of misunderstanding. And courage is a mark of maturity. It reflects a person who understands that reconciliation, even if imperfect, is better than silence. Not every relationship will be restored, and not every person will be receptive, but that's not the point. The point is that you did your part. You cleared your conscience. You extended your hand. You removed the stone that had been resting in your chest. Some people hearing this might feel a knot form inside them, because they know exactly which relationship sits unfinished. They know the name, the moment, the conversation that was never had, and that is the quiet nudge of a conscience asking for freedom. Preparing for death means no longer postponing what your heart has been urging you to address for years. It means telling the truth. It means calling the person you need to call. It means saying what needs to be said while the opportunity still exists. There is also the matter of healing from wounds you never received closure for. Not every person who hurt you will apologize. Not every story will end neatly. Some chapters of your relational life will remain jagged, but healing does not depend on them. Healing depends on what you choose to do with the pain. Will you let it stay embedded in you, shaping your future relationships, coloring your heart with bitterness? Or will you release it? Not for them, but for you. Sometimes the greatest act of reconciliation is the one that happens within your own spirit when you decide to no longer let old wounds define the rest of your journey. As you prepare for death, emotional integrity becomes essential. Peace with others creates peace within yourself. And peace within yourself creates peace in the final moments of life. These relational repairs, these conversations, these apologies, these steps toward forgiveness are not weaknesses. They are acts of profound strength. They ensure that when the time comes, you leave this world not entangled but unburdened, because a heart that has healed its relationships is a heart ready to live fully, and a heart ready to die without regret. As you continue this journey of preparing for death, there comes a profound shift in how you see your life, not as something you own, but as something you've been entrusted with. And that shift changes everything. It reframes your decisions, your priorities, your habits, even your identity. Because when you understand yourself as a steward rather than an owner, you begin to realize that nothing you possess is truly yours. It is all temporary, all passing, all borrowed. Your time, your talents, your relationships, your resources. They were placed in your hands for a season, not for eternity. And that realization doesn't diminish your life, it elevates it. It gives you a sense of responsibility, meaning, and purpose that ownership can never provide. Ownership says, "This is mine." Stewardship says, "This was entrusted to me for a reason." Those two mindsets lead to very different lives. Ownership feeds anxiety because owners fear loss. Owners cling tightly. Owners measure life by accumulation. But stewardship creates freedom. When you are a steward, you hold things with open hands. You recognize that everything has a purpose beyond your personal comfort. You see your life as part of a larger story, a larger calling, a larger design. And one of the reasons stewardship becomes essential in preparing for death is that it breaks the illusion of control. So much of the fear surrounding death comes from the belief that we are losing control. Control of our bodies, control of our choices, control of our future. But the truth is, we never had absolute control to begin with. What we had was responsibility. What we had was opportunity. What we had was influence. When you live as a steward, you no longer cling to control as if your life depends on it. You focus instead on faithfulness, on doing well with what you've been given while it is yours to manage. There is also a psychological strength that comes from this mindset. People who see life through the lens of ownership often feel threatened by change. They fear decline, they fear aging. They fear loss because it feels like part of them is being taken away. But people who adopt a stewardship mindset face change differently. They understand that life moves in seasons, and each season carries a new purpose. They don't see aging as diminishing, they see it as transitioning. They don't see decline as defeat, they see it as a shifting of assignments. And when death eventually comes, it is not the theft of what is theirs. It is the completion of what they were entrusted to carry. Another important part of stewarding your life is how you manage your time. Time is the one resource you cannot store, multiply, or reclaim. Every minute is spent, whether consciously or carelessly. When you embrace stewardship, you stop treating time as casual. You stop wasting days on distractions that do nothing for your soul. You stop measuring productivity by business and start measuring it by meaning. You begin to realize that time spent with loved ones, time spent in reflection, time spent serving, time spent growing, those are not interruptions to life, they are life. The same is true of your abilities. Too many people die with their gifts unexpressed, their ideas unfinished, their potential untouched, because they lived with the mindset of someday. But stewards don't wait for someday. They ask, "What can I do with what I have now?" They understand that gifts unused are gifts wasted. And that part of preparing for death is making sure you don't leave this world with your best work still inside you. And then there are the material things, your possessions, your resources, your wealth. Death clarifies their true value. You begin to see that none of it can go with you. None of it defines you. None of it anchors you. But while you are alive, those resources give you the chance to bless, to build, to support, to give. A wise steward uses what they have not as a monument to themselves, but as a tool for impact. Because legacy is not built by what you keep, it is built by what you release. Stewardship at its core is about responsibility without attachment. It is about gratitude without entitlement. It is about purpose without possession. And when you begin to live this way, something transformative happens. You stop fearing loss. You stop fearing the future. You stop fearing death itself because you understand that life was never about ownership. It was about faithfulness. And when you have been faithful with what you were given, you can face the end of your journey with peace, because the person who lives as a steward is never afraid to let go, only eager to finish well. As you continue preparing for the reality of death, there is a natural shift from asking, "How do I live?" to asking, "What will remain after I'm gone?" Because a meaningful life does not end when the heartbeat stops. It ripples forward in the lives it has touched, the values it has shaped, the wisdom it has passed down, and the impact it has left behind. Legacy isn't about monuments or fame, it's about influence. It's about the quiet, steady imprint your life presses onto the world long after you've stepped out of it. When people reach the end of their lives, they rarely talk about possessions. They talk about memories, about moments, about people, about lessons. They talk about the things they wish they had said sooner, the encouragement they wish they had offered, the example they wish they had set more consistently. And this reflection always leads to the same realization: the greatest legacy a person leaves is not what they achieved, but who they became. Legacy begins with character. Not the public character people applaud, but the private character that determines how you treat others when no one is watching. People remember kindness, they remember integrity, they remember generosity, honesty, courage, humility. They remember the way you made them feel seen. They remember the times you helped them through seasons you didn't even know were difficult for them. In the end, legacy is built moment by moment through quiet decisions and consistent habits. It grows through the small things far more than the grand ones. But legacy also grows through intentional investment. Every conversation you have, every word of encouragement you speak, every child you mentor, every friend you support, every stranger you treat with dignity, these are seeds. Seeds that outlive you. Seeds that grow in places you may never visit. Seeds that shape hearts you may never meet. And when you begin to see your life in this light, you understand that legacy isn't something you build at the end, it's something you build along the way. There is a psychological depth to this as well. Studies show that people who think about legacy tend to live more meaningful lives. They make wiser choices. They avoid destructive habits. They cultivate deeper relationships. They prioritize contribution over consumption. Legacy thinking anchors a person because it forces them to ask, what impact will this choice have? What will this leave behind? And those questions refine the soul. They shape the inner life. They make you more aware, more intentional, more grounded. This perspective also changes how you deal with hardship. When you're building a legacy, struggles aren't just obstacles, they're testimonies. Every challenge you overcome becomes part of the story you leave. People around you learn not just from your victories, but from your endurance. They draw strength from watching you persevere. There is a quiet power in living through difficulty with grace, because it shows others that they can too. Legacy is often forged in the fires of adversity, where character is tested and faith is proven. Another dimension of legacy is wisdom. Passing down lessons isn't just the work of parents or mentors, it's the responsibility of anyone who has learned through experience. When you share insight that saves someone else from years of confusion, pain, or regret, you have given them something that will outlast you. Wisdom is one of the most enduring gifts you can leave behind. It becomes a compass in the lives of those who hear it. And let's not overlook generosity. Not necessarily financial generosity, though that can matter, but the generosity of spirit, the generosity of time, the generosity of listening, the generosity of helping someone take their next step. These acts shape the emotional and spiritual memory you leave in others. People might not remember every detail of your life, but they will remember how your presence changed them. Ultimately, building a legacy means deciding what story your life will tell, and telling it with intention, humility, and courage. It means recognizing that every day is a chapter, every action is a sentence. Every word is a line in the story others will someday read. Preparing for death doesn't end with making peace with the past, it extends into creating meaning for the future. You can't control everything that happens after you're gone, but you can choose what you contribute while you're here. And that contribution becomes your echo. Legacy isn't about being remembered by everyone. It's about being remembered meaningfully by someone. Because the life you shape today becomes the story others carry tomorrow. So make it a story worth passing on. There comes a point in the journey of preparing for death where the emphasis shifts from reflection to readiness, from internal work to outward clarity. And this final stage is often the one people avoid the longest, not because it is painful, but because it forces them to admit that life on this earth has boundaries. Yet facing those boundaries with wisdom instead of fear is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself and those you love. When you approach death with practical readiness, you aren't surrendering to it, you are mastering it. You are removing chaos from your final season and replacing it with clarity, peace, and dignity. This kind of preparation is not cold or clinical. It is deeply human. It acknowledges that while death is inevitable, the confusion surrounding it doesn't have to be. And one of the most compassionate things you can do for the people who will one day grieve you is to leave them with order rather than uncertainty. That means thinking about things most people postpone: your wishes, your decisions, your values, your instructions. Not because you expect to die soon, but because you understand that wisdom plans not out of fear, but out of respect for life. There is a psychological strength in making decisions ahead of time. When people avoid thinking about their final days, they unknowingly carry a low-grade anxiety with them. It lingers beneath the surface, a constant whisper of unfinished business. But when you take time to articulate your desires, to communicate them clearly, that anxiety begins to dissolve. You reclaim authority over your story. You take the unknown and give it shape, and that emotional relief allows you to live more freely in the present. Just as important is the act of communicating these wishes to those who matter most. Families often struggle in the aftermath of a loss, not because the death was unexpected, but because they don't know what their loved one truly wanted. They guess, they worry, they disagree, they feel guilt that they may have made the wrong choice. But when you communicate your desires, whether about medical decisions, personal preferences, or the way you want to be remembered, you lift that burden from their shoulders. You give them the comfort of clarity. You allow them to grieve without the weight of uncertainty. This kind of preparation also includes reflecting on the kind of environment you want around you at the end of life. Some people want quiet. Others want conversation. Some want only family. Others want music, prayer, or moments of solitude. Whatever it is, thinking about it now gives you the chance to design your final atmosphere with intention rather than leaving it to circumstance. But there's another side to readiness that is just as essential: emotional closure. As death approaches, whether in thought or in reality, people often ask themselves whether they have said everything they needed to say. And far too often, the answer is no. The final stage of preparation invites you to speak what has long remained unspoken: words of gratitude, words of affirmation, words of love. Not dramatic confessions, not performative speeches, just genuine expressions that leave no lingering regret. You don't have to wait until you are old or ill to do this. In fact, the wisest time to express these things is while life is vibrant, while your relationships are alive, while your voice is strong. Because emotional closure shouldn't be a last-minute act. It should be a lifestyle. People deserve to know they mattered to you now, not someday. And you deserve the peace that comes from knowing nothing important was left unsaid. This perspective creates a spiritual posture of completion. You begin living with the mindset that each day could be a closed chapter, not in a fatalistic way, but in a purposeful one. It leads to less postponing, less withholding, less assuming. It leads to more honesty, more presence, more courage. And as you prepare practically, emotionally, and spiritually, something transformative happens. The fear surrounding death loses its grip. Not because you've escaped mortality, but because you've made peace with it. You've done your part. You've tended to your relationships. You've clarified your desires. You've released your burdens. You've offered your love. You've built your legacy. You've crafted a life that ends not in panic but in completion. This is the quiet victory available to every human being, not escaping death but facing it with such maturity, such clarity, such preparedness that it becomes not an interruption but a transition. And when that transition comes, you will not meet it fragmented or unfinished. You will meet it whole. Because the person who prepares for death with intention is the person who lives and ultimately dies with peace.